So in today's video, I'm excited to say that we're going to look at, for the first time, at stretch. You'll probably have noticed that we've been kind of exploring strengths, coaching strengths around the colour preference wheel. And we've started off with, in the blue space, with clarify. And we've talked about the importance of creating a container for meaningful work, for deep work. So the clarify bit is where you're clarifying purpose and process. You, both the coach and the client or the coachee, then have really clear expectations about what you're trying to achieve, the purpose of the coaching, and also how you're going to try and get there. How does the coachee want the coach to show up, to help them think really well, to clarify their goals, to think about how they're going to make progress, to have that forward focused conversation in a way that's really helpful and effective for them. Yellow preference energy of energizing by connecting with vision. What does good look like? Whether it be in the short term, the medium term, and the long term. Where does the client want to get to? What are they hoping to achieve? What's the future focused outcome that inspires them, that makes it worthwhile doing the work? Green preference strength, energy of encourage and explore. And we've started off talking about the importance of unconditional positive regard and how that creates a learning environment. And we've also talked a little bit about growth mindset, core conditions for growth, that green preference is really effective at doing. What we're going to think a little bit about today is stretch. So the first idea is thinking about the difference between comfort zone, stretch zone, and stress zone. And a really easy way to think about this is from what's called the Dodson performance curve, which basically looks at performance and stress. And psychologists, when they're talking about stress, they often talk about arousal and like how sort of activated our nervous system is. So we're thinking about how activated is our nervous system, how much stress are we under. And at the beginning, if we're not under very much stress, then actually we can be quite bored or apathetic. So our performance doesn't tend to be that high here. We're not performing at our best. We've got no reason to. We're not drawing on our creativity and our resilience, our resourcefulness, everything that we've learned, our full capacity and capability. We're a bit bored. We don't really need to show up. Then we've got this zone here, which is where we have our optimal performance. We could think of that as our high performance zone or as our stretch zone. And this is where we want to try and help our coachees to be as much of the time as possible. If the stress gets too high, then our performance starts to go down again. That's when we move into overwhelm, we move into panic, we move into disintegration. How can our CME behaviour preference profiles help us here? We can notice that depending on your preference, different things are going to stress you and different situations are going to be boring and understimulating. And so we're all going to have a slightly different high performance zone, stretch zone. So for example, if we think of somebody who's got a high blue preference, they might find constant change quite stressful. Whereas somebody who's got a high yellow preference might find that actually that kind of change wakes them up and really helps them to highly engage. So in that sort of way, we need to recognise that actually we're all different. There are going to be different things that stretch and stress us. So how do we help our coaching clients into that space? We'll probably recognise that this here as well is kind of comfort zone, and we know that's not where we grow, that's not where we learn and where we develop. But what's the appropriate amount of stretch that puts you into your high performance zone? The second idea that we want to think a little bit about is flow, and how we help clients into the flow zone. This comes from a really famous psychologist called Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and what he identified was a kind of a flow zone which is all about having the right balance of challenge and, let's say, competence. We enter this flow zone because in terms of our skills and our competence, it's perfectly matched to the size of the challenge ahead of us. So we don't want to have a challenge that's too big, we get overwhelmed, we go into panic. We don't want to have a challenge that's too small, because as we've just talked about in the performance curve, again, we're in apathy and boredom. So that's the flow zone. And lastly, another idea that's really helpful for us in setting up the right conditions for our coaching conversations and achieving this level of stretch by the end of them is from some writers on coaching called Blakey and Day. And they came up with what they call a support challenge matrix. What they're looking at is the perfect combination between challenge and support in the coaching relationship. And they make it really simple. If you've got really low challenge and low support in a coaching conversation, then it's rubbish. It doesn't give anything to anyone. Nobody's getting anything from it. No support, no challenge, it's a waste of time. Then they have high support and low challenge. They call this the cozy club. And if you think about it, high support and low challenge is maybe a little bit like a conversation you could have with a friend or a family member. It makes you feel good in terms of you maybe are getting encouragement, you maybe feel liked, you maybe feel listened to, but it's not really energizing. It's not giving you the kind of challenge that helps you to grow. So that's not appropriate for a coaching conversation. If you have really high challenge and low support, then that's very stressful. If any of us feel kind of overly thrown in the deep end in that way, that is stressful. We shut down, panic, disintegration, not helpful. We don't want to go there. But what we do want is we want what Blakey and Day call the loving boot, which is high challenge and high support. That is our kind of sweet spot for a coaching relationship. And that's where we want to end up by the end of a coaching session. By the end of the coaching conversation, we want to really ask, so what would be a stretching next steps action for you? Design the action plan in a way most likely to put you into that flow zone, into that high performance zone, into that support and challenge loving boot of the Blakey and Day matrix.